Hello, my friends. Welcome back. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
The first thing I noticed when I boarded the Ocean Empress was how unreal it felt. The ship was massive, gliding along the port like it didn't belong in the world of stationary, normal things. I had always dreamed of a luxury cruise, thinking it would be a vacation from reality. But as the gangplank retracted and the city disappeared behind me, I felt that old, hollow dread I used to get as a child when my parents drove me to a stranger's house. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't explain why. I tried to shake it off as I explored my cabin. The room was pristine, unnaturally clean, with that faint smell of chlorine and plastic you always find on boats. I opened the curtains to see the endless blue of the ocean and the horizon stretching into nothingness. That should have been calming. Instead, it made me feel like we were suspended in some kind of vacuum, isolated and exposed. The first night, I wandered the decks. The other passengers were cheerful, a little loud, swaying slightly as the ship cut through the waves. I heard music from a lounge somewhere below, and laughter bounced up to me. But there were shadows too, people in the corners of hallways, pausing in ways that didn't make sense. When I looked, they were gone. I chalked it up to motion sickness, fatigue, the uncanny angles of a moving ship. By the second day, the weather turned. Thick fog rolled over the ocean, swallowing the horizon. Visibility dropped to near zero, and the ship's horn sounded louder than usual, echoing into the gray void. Crew members seemed tense, exchanging looks I couldn't read. One of them, a young man who introduced himself as Mark, gave me a half smile and muttered, "You'll see soon enough." "See what?" I asked. But he was gone before I could press him further. That night, I woke to a sound like water lapping against metal, but slower, deliberate, almost like someone was walking inside the hull itself. I got out of bed, tracing it down the hall. The lights flickered. I passed empty cabins, doors closed, curtains drawn, and the sound followed me, echoing in odd places. When I reached the main corridor, it stopped abruptly. I looked out a porthole at the black ocean and saw a figure standing on the deck, staring at me. I froze. When I blinked, it was gone. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, but the unease had taken root deep in my gut. The next day, passengers began disappearing. At first, it was subtle, one or two people not showing up at breakfast or skipping a scheduled activity. The crew told everyone not to worry, citing illness or seasickness, but the pattern was too consistent. By the evening, 3 passengers were officially missing, and panic buzzed quietly among the guests. The ship's captain, a gaunt man with a pale face and eyes like ice, called an emergency meeting. His voice was calm, too calm. He said nothing about disappearances, only that the fog was dangerous, and we should remain inside our cabins. But when I returned to mine, the key card wouldn't work. I wasn't allowed in. I wandered the decks in a growing panic. Fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. Then I saw it, a figure pale and dripping, standing in a mist. I approached cautiously. Its face was featureless, smooth as porcelain, but I could sense it watching me, studying me. Before I could react, it dissolved into the fog, leaving only a whisper of cold air in its wake. That night, the ship's interior changed. Hallways that should have been straight twisted unnaturally. Stairs led to dead ends. Doors opened into walls. I began to hear voices, passengers calling for help, crying, laughing, but when I tried to respond, the sounds moved farther away. The ship had become a labyrinth, and it was alive. I met Mark again in the galley, clutching a flashlight. "It's not just the fog," he said, eyes wide. "The ship, it's hungry." "What do you mean?" I asked. "People disappear," he whispered, "not just by accident. It wants them, and it doesn't like being resisted." Before I could question him further, the lights went out completely. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long, jittery shadows. In that red glow, I saw them, shapes moving along the walls, stretching, twisting impossibly long. Some were passengers, or what remained of them, crawling like insects along the bulkhead. Their eyes glowed faintly, empty but aware. I ran. The corridors twisted and stretched, and I swear I saw entire sections of the ship disappear when I looked back. I ended up in the theater, a grand hall where we had watched a movie earlier. The seats were overturned, and the fog was inside now, curling around the ceiling like smoke. And then I heard it, a voice deep and resonant, coming from the fog. "Why are you awake?" it asked. I couldn't see the speaker, but I knew it was the ship. The voice seemed to crawl inside my head. "You don't belong here," it said. "You belong below." I ran again, down stairwells that no longer made sense, past corridors that seemed to go on forever. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against my chest. I stumbled into the crew area, hoping anyone could help me, but the crew were wrong. Their movements were jerky, puppet-like, their faces stretched in ways that weren't human. They didn't speak, only followed me with those lifeless, hollow eyes. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. Time lost meaning. I found a lifeboat, swinging gently on its davit. I jumped in, breaking free from the grip of the ship. Water slapped against the hull as I paddled away. And for a moment, I thought I was free. But then I looked back. The Ocean Empress was gone. Not sunk, not far away. Just gone. No fog, no hull, no decks, no lights. Nothing but empty ocean. I was rescued days later, but I told no one everything I saw. Authorities dismissed my story as delirium caused by isolation and seasickness. They even asked if I had been drinking. But I know the truth. I saw the ship. I know what it took. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I feel it watching me from beyond the waves, waiting. I've learned to never board a cruise ship again. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see the fog, the twisted corridors, and the faceless passengers. I hear the deep, resonant voice calling from the water, and I remember the hunger of the Ocean Empress. The last thing I saw before it vanished was its message. Next time, you won't get away. I don't know if I ever will. I never thought a vacation could feel like a death sentence. The Aurora sky promised everything. Luxury, endless ocean, and the chance to escape my tiny, stressful life for a week of indulgence. I boarded in Miami with the other passengers, all smiles and sun hats, none of us aware that the ship's grandeur was hiding something rotten beneath its polished decks. The first day was perfect, almost laughably so. The sun sparkled off the water, the buffet overflowed with shrimp and champagne, and the crew glided through the corridors like ghosts in crisp uniforms. I laughed too, but every time I passed a dark hallway or a closed cabin door, a shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't explain it. Something about the ship felt wrong. By the second day, the unease became impossible to ignore. I woke early, drawn to the upper deck, where the ocean stretched endlessly. That's when I noticed it. Shadows moving beneath the water, too slow, too deliberate to be fish. They followed the ship, matching our speed exactly, but when I blinked, they vanished. That afternoon, Strange things began to happen inside. Hallways I had walked a dozen times twisted into angles that didn't exist. I would pass a door, and when I turned back, it led somewhere entirely different. One minute, it was a crew storage closet, the next a corridor lined with cabins I hadn't seen before. I called the front desk, but the phone line was dead, and the corridors behind me seemed endless, like a maze that rearranged itself. Other passengers started noticing too. A man in a suit asked me if I'd seen the same hallway loop 3 times, and a mother whispered about her son disappearing from the kids' club. The staff brushed it off, smiling too widely, moving too quickly, and avoiding eye contact. That night, I tried to sleep, but the ship had its own rhythm. I heard steps outside my cabin door, slow, deliberate, sometimes stopping just short of it. I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. No one. Just the long, dark hallway stretching away from me. On the 3rd day, the fog rolled in from nowhere. Thick, white, and unnatural, it swallowed the decks and clung to the windows like a living thing. Visibility dropped to a few feet. The horn sounded endlessly, though no one seemed to be steering. People started disappearing in plain sight. A couple I had met at breakfast vanished from the dining hall. Their chairs were empty, plates still warm. The crew said nothing. The passengers who noticed were too terrified to speak. I wandered the decks alone, searching for an exit or clue. That's when I saw her, a woman, pale, hair plastered to her face, standing at the railing. She turned toward me slowly, eyes black, hollow. Her mouth opened as if to scream, but no sound came. Then she dissolved into the fog, leaving only the echo of something ancient, like a memory pressing against my brain. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Time didn't exist. Food disappeared, water turned brackish, and the sun never moved. I ran through hallways that led nowhere, stairs that went down but ended on the deck, and doors that opened into walls. The ship was alive. I began to understand, in fragments, that it fed on us, not in the sense of eating, but in the sense of swallowing. It trapped us, made us part of itself, erased us from the world. By the 4th night, I could hear voices in the fog. Not whispers, not cries. Singing. Hundreds of voices harmonizing in a haunting, impossible melody that made my teeth ache and my stomach twist. I followed it, hoping to find other survivors, but it only led me to a stairwell that ended mid-air, opening into nothing. I fell. When I woke, I was in the ship's engine room, or something that resembled it. Pipes twisted like veins, machinery hummed with a life of its own, and in the center, a pool of black water swirled. Figures moved beneath the surface, pale, faceless, reaching up toward me. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. A voice spoke, not through the air, but in my mind. "You've seen too much," it said. "You belong now." I felt a pull, as if invisible hands were dragging me toward the water. I fought, kicking and screaming, but I could feel myself dissolving, my body growing lighter, my mind unraveling. And then, in a sudden rush of clarity, I remembered something. Ships never move on their own. They need someone to steer them. I ran, not knowing where I was going. The corridors twisted and turned, and for the first time, I felt the ship hesitate, as if confused. I burst onto the bridge. The captain was gone. All the controls were blinking erratically, and the instruments were impossible to read. But then I saw it, a small hatch, mark escape. I jumped through, falling onto a lifeboat. I rowed as fast as I could, pushing through the fog. The singing faded behind me, replaced by silence. For the first time in days, I saw the horizon, faint but real. I thought I was free, But then I heard it. Not a voice, not singing, just the sound of metal on metal, and I turned. The aurora sky was rising from the fog, but it wasn't normal. Its hull was twisted, jagged, edges sharp like broken glass. The lights were red, pulsing, and the deck was crawling with shadows. And at the bow, I saw hundreds of faceless figures, all turned to watch me, reaching with impossible arms. I tried to row faster, but the boat didn't move. The water thickened, dragging me back. I struggled, feeling it pull me toward the ship. And then, in a sudden twist, I realized I had never really left the aurora sky. The lifeboat, the fog, even the ocean, they were part of it. The ship had been showing me freedom, testing me, and I had failed. I felt myself pulled aboard, the deck swallowing me whole. But as I hit the surface, I wasn't terrified anymore. A strange calm filled me. I understood, finally, that this was no accident, no malice. The ship was ancient, older than any ocean charted, and it had a purpose. To survive, it needed passengers, souls willing to embrace its reality. And I did. I am writing this now, not for help, not for warning. That would be pointless. You won't find the aurora sky on any radar. No cruise line claims it. It appears to those who need it, those who seek escape. And I write this because one day, someone else will board, and I will show them the ship as it truly is. I am part of it now, but I am not afraid. Not anymore. The aurora sky drifts endlessly, waiting for the next traveler. And sometimes late at night, I see her, pale, hair plastered, eyes hollow, and I smile. She is next. I never thought I'd be the type to get scared on a cruise. I had boarded the Celestial Dawn expecting a week of sun, buffet food, and endless selfies by the pool. The ship gleamed under the Florida sun as if it had been polished just for me. My friends laughed at my anxious glances, brushing off my unease as pre-vacation nerves. But I knew. I could feel it from the moment I stepped on board. Something was wrong. The first day passed smoothly enough. Everything was luxurious, almost unreal. The corridors smelled faintly of disinfectant and salt. The crew moved with eerie precision, smiling too widely, too brightly. At night, I tried to sleep, but the gentle sway of the ship was accompanied by something else. A low, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on metal, coming from somewhere deep within the hull. I told myself it was the pipes. It had to be. By the second day, the strange feeling had grown. The first odd thing happened at breakfast. I had just poured coffee when I noticed a man staring at me. He was wearing a suit, odd for a cruise, and his gaze was sharp, unblinking. I nodded politely, but when I turned back, he was gone. I asked a waitress if anyone had sat there before, and she shook her head, her smile stiff. Later, on the deck, I saw shadows moving in the water alongside the ship. Not fish, not dolphins, something darker, elongated, moving with deliberate purpose. I blinked and it vanished. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things, but every passenger I passed had the same taut, nervous look. Nobody spoke of it. That night, the tapping returned. Louder, closer. I got up to investigate and found myself in the lower corridors, places I had never been. Doors were slightly ajar, leading into dark cabins that didn't exist on the ship's map. One door opened onto a room full of mirrors. In each reflection, I saw someone else staring back at me. People I didn't know, faces twisted in silent screams. When I spun around, the room was empty. By the third day, panic had started to ripple through the passengers. People vanished. At first, it was subtle. A man didn't return from a walk on the deck. A family failed to show up for lunch. The crew said nothing. I noticed one of the lifeboats swinging empty, though the ropes weren't attached. It should have been impossible. Then the fog rolled in. Thick, unnatural, smelling faintly of iron and decay. The deck was swallowed. Visibility dropped to mere feet, and the horizon disappeared. The horns sounded incessantly, though I couldn't see the source. People on deck became silhouettes, frozen and unreal, like wax figures trapped in white smoke. I wandered the hallways, trying to find someone, anyone. That's when I noticed the corridors themselves weren't right. Hallways I had walked dozens of times looped back impossibly. Doors opened to walls. Stairwells led upward but ended in midair. I realized the ship was changing around me, alive in a way that made no sense. Then I saw them. Faces, not just in mirrors or reflections, but emerging from the walls, from the fog, from the water. Pale, faceless, some with features stretched and impossible. They reached for me, but I couldn't touch them, and they couldn't touch me. Still, the sensation was horrifying, a pressure, a pull, a whisper that I couldn't understand, but somehow knew was a command. By the fourth day, I could no longer tell what was real. The sun never moved, the food vanished before I could eat it, and the other passengers moved like automatons. One of them, a young woman, whispered my name. "It's hungry," she said. "It doesn't want you to leave." I asked her what she meant, but her eyes went blank, and she walked into the fog, disappearing completely. I tried to leave. I thought if I could just get to a lifeboat, I'd be safe. I found one hanging from the davit and jumped in, only to find that the water was impossibly thick, almost gelatinous, resisting every stroke. Behind me, the ship loomed in the fog, larger than it should have been, its decks stretching into the mist like a city of steel and shadows. Faces pressed against the railing, reaching. The singing began, low, impossible, hundreds of voices harmonizing in a melody that made my bones ache. I realized then that escaping was pointless. The ship had no real boundaries. Its corridors were endless, and the fog was part of it. The shadows were part of it, and it wanted me. I drifted in the lifeboat until the fog lifted, or so I thought. When I looked back, the celestial dawn was gone. The ocean stretched empty, nothing but sky and waves. Relief washed over me, temporary and fragile. I headed toward what I thought was land, rowing until my arms burned. When I finally arrived, I was on a beach, sun setting over sand that glittered unnaturally. There was no town, no roads, just the sand, the surf, and a path that led into dense jungle. Exhausted, I stumbled along it, trying to keep moving. And then I saw the people, dozens of them, wandering the jungle, faces pale, eyes wide, mouths open but silent. I realized with a jolt that they weren't human anymore. They moved as if controlled, but aware, like puppets whose strings were invisible. And in the center of them all, the woman from the fog stood, perfectly still. She looked at me and smiled. "You made it," she said. Her voice wasn't hers. It was the ship's, echoing inside my head. "But you can never leave. Not truly." The realization hit me like a punch. The Celestial Dawn wasn't just a ship. It wasn't just a place. It was a predator, ancient and cunning, and it had released me into this garden of the lost, where land and ocean blended into a prison. I was free from the ship, yes, but not free from it. I've wandered here ever since, following paths that lead nowhere, seeing new faces in the mist and realizing they were the latest arrivals. Some try to fight it, some accept it. I've learned to move quietly, to watch, to wait. Because one day, the celestial dawn will come for me again, and when it does, I'll board willingly. It doesn't matter how far I go, how many miles I walk, or how many days I survive. The ship has already chosen me. And the strangest part? I don't feel fear anymore. I feel anticipation. The celestial dawn drifts somewhere out there, waiting, and when it finds the next traveler, I will be waiting too, watching, guiding, helping them see the truth. I am part of it now, and maybe, just maybe, that is the only way to survive. I always thought cruises were supposed to be relaxing. The Neptune's veil promised luxury, endless ocean views, and a week of pampering I had convinced myself I deserved. Boarding in Miami, I noticed something about the ship that unsettled me immediately. It gleamed too brightly, as if the sun itself feared to touch it. The crew smiled constantly, but their smiles were rigid, precise, and hollow. The first day was normal enough. The buffet overflowed with food, the pool sparkled, and passengers laughed as if nothing could touch them. I walked the decks, feeling the breeze and staring at the endless horizon, but there was a heaviness in the air, a tension I couldn't place. When I glanced at the water, I thought I saw something moving beneath the surface. Long shapes, black and sleek, that vanished the moment I blinked. That night, I awoke to a knocking sound. Not gentle, but insistent, like someone rapping on the metal hull from the inside. My cabin door rattled. I peered through the peephole. No one, just the long corridor, dimly lit, stretching further than it should have. I tried to sleep again, but the knocking persisted, echoing through the walls. By the second day, things grew stranger. Passengers began disappearing. At first, it was subtle. A man didn't show up for breakfast. A family vanished from the deck. The crew ignored the missing people, continuing their routines as if nothing had happened. I asked a waitress what happened to them, and she smiled tightly. Some people don't like the ship, she said. They leave. The fog rolled in that evening, thick and sudden, swallowing the decks and muting the horizon. Visibility dropped to a few feet. The horn blared continuously, though no one was steering the ship. The passengers on deck froze like statues, staring outward, faces blank. I ran to my cabin, only to find my key card no longer worked. I was locked down my own room. I wandered the hallways, trying to find anyone who could explain what was happening. Doors opened into walls, staircases ended midair, and corridors twisted impossibly. Some of the other passengers wandered too, lost, whispering about voices calling them, lights shifting, mirrors reflecting things that weren't there. I caught a glimpse of a figure in the fog, a woman, drenched, hair plastered to her face, her eyes black and empty. She stared at me, then dissolved into mist. By the third day, it became clear the ship wasn't normal. It had a will of its own. Hallways reconfigured when I wasn't looking, rooms appeared and disappeared, and the corridors seemed to stretch into infinity. I followed a sound, a low humming like machinery, but it led me to a room full of shadows. They writhed on the walls, twisting into the shapes of passengers I had seen earlier. I recognized them immediately, the ones who had vanished. Their mouths opened, silent screams escaping into nothing. I ran. I found a lifeboat hanging from the side of the ship and jumped in. The water outside was thick and black, almost like ink, resisting every stroke. I rowed desperately, trying to escape, but the ship loomed behind me, larger than it should have been. Its decks extended into the fog like a city, and faces pressed against the railings, faceless and watching. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Time had no meaning. Eventually, the fog lifted and I saw land. Relief flooded me. I rode toward it, exhausted, desperate for safety. I landed on a beach, sand pale and glittering unnaturally under the setting sun. There was no town, no port, only a dense forest beyond the sand. As I stepped onto the shore, I noticed movement. Figures, dozens of them, wandering aimlessly in the forest. Faces pale, eyes wide, mouths open but silent. They moved mechanically like puppets. I realized with a jolt that they were the missing passengers. And then I saw the woman from the fog. She stood at the forest edge, watching me. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Her voice wasn't hers. It came from the ship itself. "You belong with us now." Panic surged, but before I could run, I realized something horrifying. The beach, the forest, the sun, it was all part of the ship's domain. The Neptune's veil had never really let me go. The land was a trap, an extension of its will. I was still inside it, caught in its impossible reality. Then I understood. The ship didn't just take people, it transformed them. The lost passengers weren't dead. They had been changed, absorbed into the ship's consciousness, part of its endless, shifting maze. I could feel it reaching for me, calling me, shaping my thoughts. Resistance was pointless. But I did something no one else had. I laughed. It startled even me, hearing the sound echo in the unnatural silence. I realized the ship expected fear, submission. It thrived on despair. If I embraced it instead, if I welcomed it, maybe I could change the rules. I walked toward the woman, toward the forest, and let the ship wrap itself around me. The fog, the halls, the corridors, they flowed into me, but I didn't feel trapped. I felt powerful. I could see the ship as it truly was, an ancient, sentient vessel, moving not just through the ocean, but through dimensions, seeking those who would become part of it. The other passengers, faceless, pale, watched me. They sensed the shift. The ship's voice filled my mind. "You've learned." I smiled. I had survived in a way no one else could. I had turned fear into control, and now I would guide the next travelers, show them the paths they weren't meant to see, lead them through the maze of the ship, but not to terror, to understanding. The Neptune's veil drifts somewhere out there, invisible to the world, waiting. Most who board are consumed by fear, becoming part of its endless maze. But I'm different. I am part of it, yes, but free in a way no one else can be. And when the next passengers step aboard, I will meet them, not as a victim, but as a guide. I have learned the ship's secret. Terror is a tool, but surrender is power. And I am its master now, walking the halls of the Neptune's veil, waiting for the curious, the bold, the foolish. The ocean stretches endlessly, but I fear nothing, because I am the ship now, and the ship is me. I should have known something was wrong the moment I stepped onto the Horizon Spirit. The terminal was bustling, families and couples laughing, luggage rolling across the tile floors. But when I saw the ship gleaming under the sun, I felt a chill run through me. It wasn't just the size, it was the way it floated there, impossibly still, as if it were waiting for me. The first day felt normal. The pool glistened, the buffet overflowed, and I laughed with strangers while sipping a cocktail on the upper deck. But every time I passed the lower hallways, I noticed shadows lingering in the corners, too dark, too still to be ordinary. Crew members smiled at me, but their eyes never moved. It was unnerving, but I chalked it up to nerves. That night, I woke to a strange sound. At first, I thought it was the sea lapping against the hull, but it wasn't water. It was a rhythmic tapping, slow, deliberate, coming from the hallway outside my cabin. I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. When I opened the door, the corridor stretched longer than I remembered, twisting impossibly into darkness. By the second day, passengers were beginning to notice things too. People went missing. A man didn't return from a morning jog on deck. A young couple vanished from the buffet. Chairs still pulled back, plates abandoned. Crew members said nothing. Some passengers whispered that the ship was hungry, but no one laughed. The fog came suddenly on the evening of the second day. It rolled across the decks like a living thing, thick and suffocating, swallowing the horizon and muting the sun. The horn sounded endlessly, though no one at the controls acknowledged it. Visibility dropped to a few feet. Passengers froze, staring outward, expressionless. I tried to retreat to my cabin, but my key card no longer worked. The door remained locked. I wandered the ship in growing panic. Hallways bent and twisted, staircases led to nowhere, and doors opened into rooms I had never seen before. Mirrors reflected not my own face, but someone else's, pale, silent, eyes hollow. Shadows moved along the walls, writhing into shapes of people I knew had disappeared. I realized with horror that the ship was alive, and it was watching me. By the third day, I understood the pattern. The ship didn't take people randomly. It consumed them slowly, reshaping them into part of itself. I saw them in glimpses, faceless figures moving along the decks, stretching unnaturally, trapped yet aware. They were not dead, but they were no longer human. The thought of becoming like them made my skin crawl. I found a lifeboat hanging from the side. The water outside was black and viscous, resisting every stroke as I rowed. The ship loomed behind me, impossibly tall, its decks stretching into the fog. Faces pressed against the railings, faceless and watching. I paddled with all my strength, ignoring the numbness in my arms. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time had no meaning. Eventually, I spotted land. Relief surged through me as I rowed closer, exhausted but hopeful. The boat grounded on a pale, glittering beach. I stumbled onto the sand, gasping. But the land was wrong. There were no towns, no roads, only endless dunes and a dense forest that seemed to shift when I looked away. And then I saw them. Hundreds of people wandering the forest, pale, expressionless, moving without purpose. They were the missing passengers, and in their midst, a figure, the woman from the fog, hair plastered to her face, eyes black as coal. She looked at me and smiled, and I felt a pull, a lure stronger than fear. "You can't leave," she said. Her voice wasn't hers. It resonated in my mind, deep, commanding. "You belong here now." Panic surged. I turned to run, but the sand beneath my feet shifted like water, dragging me back. The sky above rippled, turning a dark, unnatural color. I realized with dawning horror, the ship had never let me go. The beach, the forest, the sun, all were extensions of its will. I was trapped, but this time not in the ship itself, but in its world. I struggled, screaming, thrashing, but the pull was irresistible. Then, in the depths of my terror, a thought struck me. What if fear was its power? What if resisting wasn't enough? I stopped. I sat on the sand, trembling, staring at the faceless figures. And then I laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh that echoed through the air. The woman's smile faltered. The faceless figures paused. The world around me stilled, the shifting sand halting midwave. The ship's pull weakened. I stood, feeling the first spark of control I had felt since boarding. I had become part of its game, yes, but perhaps I could play it differently. I walked toward the forest, toward the woman, and spoke aloud. I will not be afraid. I will not be yours. For a moment, the world shivered. The fog lifted, revealing a strange clarity. The figures turned toward me, their motions jerky, unsure. I realized then that I wasn't trapped. I was negotiating. The ship was not omnipotent. It responded to intent, to the mind that could see beyond fear. I turned back to the horizon. The horizon spirit was not visible, but I could feel its presence, immense and patient, watching, calculating. I understood something crucial. It had always been waiting for someone who could resist, someone who could confront it without despair. And I had. The beach, the forest, the faceless passengers, they were not a prison. They were an invitation. The ship existed to test, to consume, to reshape. But I had found a loophole. I could walk freely between its world and the real one, move unseen, unafraid, a survivor unlike any before me. I don't know how long I have. The ship drifts somewhere beyond the reach of any radar, invisible to the world, waiting for the next passengers. But I have a choice now. I can guide them, help them navigate its impossible corridors, or I can leave them to their fear. I choose neither. I will watch. I will learn. I will become something entirely new. The Horizon Spirit and I are no longer separate. I am no longer a passenger, nor a victim. I am a part of it, and it is a part of me. And when the next travelers board, I will greet them with a smile, not of malice, but of understanding. Because in the end, the ship is alive, yes. Dangerous, yes. But it is nothing without a mind brave enough to face it. And I am ready. I've been on cruises before, but nothing prepared me for the Abyssal Star. I was excited at first, boarding in Fort Lauderdale with my luggage, and a sense of relief that I'd finally escaped my life for a week. The ship was beautiful, sleek and gleaming, like a palace floating on water. But the first thing I noticed was how quiet it felt. Not just calm, but quiet in a way that pressed against my ears. The crowd of passengers chattered, glasses clinked, music played, yet it all felt muted, as though I were hearing it from underwater. The first day passed uneventfully, or so I thought. I explored the upper decks, sipped my drink by the pool, and smiled at strangers. But every time I passed a hallway leading to the lower decks, I felt a chill, as if the ship itself were breathing around me. Crew members smiled at me, too wide, too perfect. Their eyes never wavered, never blinked like normal people's eyes do. That night, I awoke to a faint vibration beneath the floorboards, almost imperceptible but consistent. A low hum, rising and falling, like the heartbeat of something enormous. I got out of bed, traced it to the hallway, and saw something that froze my blood. The carpet itself seemed to ripple, as if alive, like water flowing slowly under my feet. I backed away and it stopped. The next morning, passengers began to vanish. At first, it was small, a man who didn't show up for breakfast, a child that didn't return from the kids' club. Crew members insisted everything was fine. People get seasick, take tours, wander the decks, one young man told me with a tight smile. But I could see the empty stares of other passengers who had noticed too. Something wasn't right. By the second night, the fog rolled in. Not weather fog. This was unnatural, thick, white, curling along the decks as if it were alive. It swallowed everything. The horizon, the other passengers, even the pool. I could barely see a few feet ahead. The ship's horn began to sound, not in long blasts, but in short, staccato bursts like Morse code. I had no idea what it meant, and no one else seemed to hear it, or at least they didn't react. I wandered the decks in a panic, trying to find anyone who could explain what was happening. Doors led to rooms that didn't exist. Staircases ended midair. Mirrors reflected people I didn't recognize, eyes black and hollow, mouths open in silent screams. I began to notice shapes moving beneath the fog, long, dark silhouettes that mirrored the ship's every movement. By the third day, I realized the Abyssal Star wasn't just a ship. It was a predator. It consumed people, yes, but not their bodies, their minds. I glimpsed passengers wandering like marionettes, moving through corridors that no longer obeyed logic, eyes glazed, silent. I understood then. The ship reshaped reality around it, absorbing consciousness into its impossible geometry. I tried to leave. I found a lifeboat hanging from its davit and jumped in. The water outside was unnaturally still, black and viscous. I rowed, panicked, praying I'd escape. But the ship followed. Its outlines stretched impossibly, decks curving like a crescent moon. Shadows pressed against the railings, faceless, reaching for me. The fog rose behind it, and I could hear the hum, like machinery or the heartbeat of something alive. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time was meaningless. When the fog finally lifted, I saw land. A beach, white and sparkling, stretching endlessly. Relief surged through me. I rowed ashore, exhausted, barely aware of the forest that began at the edge of the sand. And then I realized the horror of it. There were people on the beach, hundreds of them, wandering aimlessly, pale, faceless, eyes hollow. They were the missing passengers, and in their midst, the woman I had glimpsed in the fog stood. Hair plastered her face, eyes black, watching me. "You can't leave," she said. Her voice wasn't hers. It vibrated in my mind. "You belong here now." I wanted to run, but the sand under my feet shifted like water. Each step forward was dragged back. The sky rippled unnaturally. I realized then that I wasn't really on land. The ship had followed me here, projected this beach, this forest as part of its reality. I was still inside it. I fell to my knees, despair crushing me. But then, as I looked at the faceless figures, I understood something strange. They weren't dead. They weren't even prisoners. They had surrendered. They had accepted the ship. It thrived on fear, yes, but also on the refusal to understand, the panic. I took a deep breath and did the one thing I hadn't done since boarding. I laughed. A sound that was entirely my own, sharp and defiant. The faceless figures stopped moving. The sand stilled. The fog retreated slightly. I stood. I focused on the horizon. I would not fear. I would not submit. And then I saw it. The woman from the fog, the faceless passengers, they weren't obstacles. They were guides. The ship wasn't trying to kill me. It was testing me. I stepped forward and something incredible happened. The sand beneath my feet solidified. The forest opened a path, and I felt myself walking not into a trap, but into understanding. I could see the ship as it truly was, an ancient vessel, sentient, moving not just through oceans, but through dimensions, feeding on the weak-minded, growing with every fearful soul. And I had passed its test. I turned back and saw the passengers, faceless, turning toward me. They were no longer monsters. They were students, witnesses, guardians like me. The woman smiled, and I felt the ship's presence shift. It no longer loomed over me. It recognized me. I walked toward the water, toward the horizon, and realized something no one else ever had. The ship was not a prison. It was a teacher, a mirror of fear, a forge for those who could survive its labyrinth. And I had survived. I did not leave the abyssal star. I boarded it willingly, but I was not afraid. I understood its purpose, its hunger, its intelligence. I became a part of it. Not a victim, not a prisoner, but a sentinel, a guide for the next passengers who would come aboard. The abyssal star drifts somewhere in the Atlantic, unseen, waiting for those who seek escape. Most who board will be consumed. Some will vanish, but a rare few, like me, will learn its secret. I walk the corridors now, invisible to fear, invisible to the weak. I am part of the ship's mind. I am no longer just a passenger. And when the next travelers step aboard, I will meet them, not with malice, but with understanding. Because fear is the ship's language, and I have learned to speak another. I am its guardian now, and in that truth, I am free. I should have noticed the first warning the moment I stepped aboard the Eclipse Horizon. It was a modern cruise ship, gleaming white, almost impossibly large, and the sun reflected off in a way that made it seem more like a sculpture than a vessel. Everyone around me was smiling, taking pictures, clinking drinks. But there was something in the air, a kind of pressure, like the ship was already aware I'd arrived. The first night was uneventful, but I felt uneasy. The cabin smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal. When I looked out the porthole at the endless black water, I thought I saw shapes moving just below the surface. Large, sleek, too purposeful to be fish. When I blinked, they were gone. By the second day, I noticed small oddities. Hallways didn't quite line up. A staircase would lead to a corridor that wasn't on the deck plan. Crew members would pass me without acknowledgement, eyes straight ahead, their smiles fixed and too wide. Once, I saw a stewardess vanish into a wall as I walked toward her. I blinked, and she was gone. Other passengers began to whisper. One woman told me her husband had disappeared while getting ice water. Another passenger said the same thing had happened to a child on the deck. The crew brushed it off, insisting they were just seasick or had wandered off. But there were too many missing, and the fear spreading through the passengers was palpable. That night, I woke to a sound like metal grinding against metal. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was the hull expanding, the engine humming. But when I got up, I saw shadows moving along the walls in impossible ways, stretching, twisting, merging into each other. I ran to the hallway and saw a figure at the end, pale, with a face like melted porcelain. It didn't move like a human. When I blinked, it was gone. By the third day, the fog came. Thick, white, rolling across the decks, swallowing everything in sight. The horizon vanished. The horn blew constantly, though no one was at the controls. I tried to find other passengers, but the hallways looped impossibly, and doors led to rooms I'd never seen. Mirrors reflected people I didn't recognize, and sometimes not me at all. I realized the ship wasn't just malfunctioning. It was alive. It reshaped reality, feeding on fear, and I wasn't sure if anyone who had disappeared was gone, or had simply become part of it. I wandered the lower decks, trying to find the engine room, or someone who could explain what was happening. But the corridors twisted endlessly. Time lost meaning. I eventually found a lifeboat hanging on the davit and jumped in, paddling desperately. The water wasn't normal. It was thick, almost viscous, as if resisting me. Behind me, I glimpsed the eclipse horizon looming impossibly tall, its decks curving and stretching into the fog, with figures pressed to the railings, faceless, pale, reaching for me. Hours or days passed. My arms ached, but eventually the fog lifted, revealing land. I rode to a beach of pale sand and stumbled ashore. Relief washed over me. For the first time in days, I felt I might survive. And then I saw them. Hundreds of figures wandering the dunes, faceless, hollow-eyed, silent. They were the missing passengers, and at their center, the woman from the fog stood. Hair plastered her face, eyes black, watching me. "You can't leave," she said, her voice vibrating inside my head. "You belong here now." Panic surged. I turned to run, but the sand shifted beneath my feet, dragging me back. The sky above rippled unnaturally, and the horizon curved, folding in on itself. I realized then that I wasn't really on land. The ship had followed me. This beach, this forest beyond it, everything was its creation. I was trapped. I fell to my knees, despair crushing me. But then a strange thought occurred. All the passengers who had surrendered looked calm. Their fear had ended, and the ship responded differently to those who did not panic. I stopped struggling and sat in the sand, trembling. I refused to fight, refused to let the panic consume me. I looked at the faceless figures, and instead of fear, I focused on observation. I studied their movements, the patterns in the shifting sand, the way the fog rolled. I listened. Then I realized something extraordinary. The ship wanted me to act like the others, to fear, to despair, to submit. By resisting a new way, I had broken its usual control. I stood, taking slow, deliberate steps, and the world shifted slightly in response. The sand solidified under my feet, the fog thinned, and the forest path opened. I approached the woman. "I will not be afraid," I said. "I will not belong to fear." Her smile faltered. The faceless passengers turned toward me, uncertain, hesitant. The ship itself, massive and unseen beyond the horizon, seemed to pause. I realized then that this entity was not purely malevolent. It was a sentient predator, yes, but it was also a test. It thrived on fear, feeding on those who submitted. I had survived because I had learned to confront it. I walked forward, fully aware that I was now inside the ship's domain, but no longer its victim. The faceless passengers followed, not as captives, but as witnesses. The woman from the fog, no longer menacing, gestured toward the horizon. "You can leave," she said, "or you can stay and see the ship as it truly is." I made a choice. I walked toward the horizon, into the world the ship had created, and something incredible happened. I felt my mind merge with the ship's perception. I was not swallowed. I was not consumed. I understood. The eclipse horizon was a vessel older than memory, moving through oceans and realities alike, seeking fear, but also seeking those who could face it. I returned to the beach, but it was no longer a prison. I could move freely between the ship's domain and the real ocean, invisible to fear. I was no longer a passenger. I was a guardian, a witness, a part of the ship's intelligence. The eclipse horizon drifts somewhere in the Atlantic, unseen by any radar, waiting for the next passengers who will succumb to terror. Most will be consumed. Some will vanish. But a rare few, those who confront it without despair, will survive. I am one of them. And when the next traveler's board, I will meet them, not to harm them, not to frighten them, but to guide them. Fear is the ship's language, but I have learned to speak another. I am its guardian, and in that truth, I am free. I should have trusted my instincts the moment I saw the ocean mirage. It was a brand new cruise ship, gleaming like a jewel in the Miami harbor, and everyone around me seemed thrilled. Families laughed, couples posed for photos, and the crew moved with robotic precision. But I felt something in the air, an almost tangible weight, like the ship itself was watching me. I shrugged it off. I had a week to relax, to escape my life. The first day felt normal. I lounged by the pool, sipped cocktails, and wandered the endless decks. But every time I glanced down to the lower corridors, I noticed shadows lingering where they shouldn't. I thought I saw figures moving through closed doors, vanishing when I looked closer. I told myself it was my imagination. That night, I woke to a strange sound. Not loud, but insistent, a tapping, rhythmic like fingernails rapping on metal. It came from the hallway outside my cabin. I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. I opened the door. The hallway stretched farther than I remembered, dark and endless. I turned back. My cabin had disappeared. The door was gone. By the second day, passengers began disappearing. First, small things. A man didn't show up for breakfast. A child vanished from the pool. The crew acted as if nothing had happened. They probably went sightseeing, a steward said, smiling too widely. But the smiles didn't reach their eyes. Something was wrong. Later, I tried to find a map of the ship. It was gone. The hallways seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. Staircases ended in walls. Doors opened into rooms I had never seen. Mirrors reflected passengers I didn't recognize, some faceless, some screaming silently. I realized with a cold certainty, the ship was alive and it was playing with me. By the third night, a fog rolled across the decks. Thick, white, curling like smoke, it swallowed the horizon and muted sound. The horn sounded, but not in normal blasts. Short, staccato bursts like Morse code. The passengers froze outside, staring blindly into the mist, expressionless. I could barely breathe. I ran through hallways that no longer obeyed geometry. Some doors opened onto nothing. Some stairs led straight into walls. I tried to escape. I found a lifeboat and jumped, paddling desperately. The water outside was unnaturally viscous, resisting every stroke. Behind me, the ocean mirage loomed impossibly large, decks curving into fog. Shadows pressed against the railings, reaching, faceless and silent. I rode until my arms ached, ignoring the numbness spreading through my body. Hours or days passed. Time lost all meaning. Eventually, I saw land. Pale sand, stretching endlessly, forest beyond the dunes. Relief washed over me. I ran to the shore, but the moment my feet touched the sand, I froze. Figures emerged from a mist. Hundreds of them, pale, hollow-eyed, wandering aimlessly. They were the missing passengers. And at their center stood a woman I had glimpsed in the fog. Hair plastered her face, eyes black, unblinking. She watched me. "You can't leave," she said, and her voice filled my head. "You belong here now." I tried to run. The sand shifted like water beneath my feet, pulling me back. The horizon curved unnaturally, the forest moving in impossible ways. The ship had followed me. This wasn't land. It was an extension of the ship's will. I was trapped. Despair set in. I fell to my knees, imagining I would join the faceless passengers, becoming one of them. But then I noticed something strange. The ones who had stopped moving, who had surrendered, looked calm. Their fear had ended, and the ship treated them differently. It fed on terror, but not on acceptance. I took a deep breath and stopped struggling. I refused to panic. I observed the faceless figures, the shifting sand, the fog curling around them. I listened to the ship in a way I had never dared before. Slowly I stood. I focused on understanding, not fear. The woman in the center tilted her head. The faceless passengers turned, uncertain. The sand hardened beneath my feet, the fog thinned. A path opened through the dunes toward the forest. "You see it," the woman said, her voice still in my head. "You understand. Few ever do." I realized then that the ship was a predator, yes, but also a test. It had been feeding on the weak-minded, the fearful, shaping reality around them. But I had survived because I refused to give it power over me. I walked toward the horizon, fully aware that I was inside its world, yet free in a way no one else was. The faceless passengers followed, not threatening me, not dragging me down. They were witnesses, observers. The ship's presence pulsed around me, immense and patient, and for the first time, I did not feel fear. I had a choice. I could return to the water, to the endless drifting, or I could stay, embrace what I had learned, and move freely inside the ship's domain. I chose the latter. I am now part of it, not a prisoner, not a victim, but a guardian. The ocean mirage drifts somewhere beyond maps and radar, waiting for the next passengers. Most will succumb to terror. Some will vanish. A rare few, like me, confront it, survive it, and become guides for the next travelers. I walk its corridors, invisible to fear, teaching the curious, observing the lost, shaping the ship's world not with terror, but with understanding. The ocean mirage is alive, ancient, and vast, but it is not invincible. Courage and clarity are weapons against it. And when the next travelers step aboard, I will meet them, not with malice, but with guidance. Fear is the ship's language. I have learned another. I am no longer a passenger. I am its sentinel. And in that truth, I am free. I thought this cruise would be the escape I needed. The Mariner's Veil promised a week of sun, buffet food, and endless ocean views. Boarding in Miami, I felt the excitement of freedom, leaving my city life behind. But the ship itself gave me pause. It floated like a monument, its decks spotless, gleaming, and for some reason, its scale felt wrong. Immense, almost unnatural. The first day was uneventful, if a bit strange. The other passengers laughed, lounged by the pool, took selfies. I wandered the corridors, and each time I passed the lower decks, I felt a cold draft that shouldn't have existed. Shadows moved where there were none to cast them. Crew members smiled at me with a precision that unnerved me. Their eyes never wavered, never blinked fully. That night, I awoke to a low humming sound, almost like a distant engine vibrating through the floorboards. I tried to sleep, but the sound persisted. When I rose to investigate, I noticed the hallway stretching impossibly, longer than it should have been. Doors I knew well were gone, replaced by blank walls. My cabin vanished. By the second day, passengers started disappearing. A man didn't return for breakfast. A family vanished from a pool. Crew members insisted they had left voluntarily, but I noticed the subtle panic in the other passengers' faces. Something was feeding on this ship, and it wasn't water or food. The fog came that evening, thick, white, curling across the decks, swallowing the horizon and the sun alike. The horn sounded not in long blasts, but short, staccato bursts. No one else seemed to hear it, or they ignored it. I ventured toward the deck, but passengers froze, staring blindly into the mist. Faces pale, eyes empty. I felt the first tendrils of fear creep into me. I tried to find a way off the ship. Hallways twisted impossibly. Staircases led to nowhere. Doors opened to rooms I didn't recognize. Mirrors reflected strangers instead of myself. Some with hollow eyes, mouths opening silently. I understood then. The ship was alive. It was reshaping reality, feeding not just on bodies, but on fear, confusion, and panic. By the third night, I had no plan but to escape. I found a lifeboat and jumped. The water was unnatural black, viscous, almost resisting me. I paddled frantically, but behind me, the mariner's veil loomed impossibly, decks stretching into the fog. Figures pressed against the railings, faceless, pale, reaching. Hours, or maybe days, passed. Time had no meaning. Finally, land appeared. Pale sand, stretching endlessly, a dense forest beyond. Relief surged. I ran to the shore, only to freeze. The missing passengers were there, wandering like ghosts, pale, hollow-eyed, silent. And in their midst, a woman I had glimpsed in the fog stood, hair plastered to her face, eyes black. "You can't leave," she said, her voice filling my head. "You belong here now." Panic surged, but the sand shifted beneath my feet, pulling me back. The horizon curved unnaturally. I realized with horror, the ship had followed me. This wasn't land. It was a creation of its will, a trap extending beyond the water. I sank to my knees, but then I noticed something. The faceless figures weren't moving with panic. They were calm. Their fear had ended, and the ship treated them differently. I realized then that the mariner's veil thrived on terror. Fear empowered it. Acceptance bound its victims. I stopped struggling. I focused, studied the figures, the sand, the shifting fog. I observed rather than panicked. Slowly I stood. The sand solidified beneath me. The fog lifted slightly. The path through the dunes opened. The woman in the center looked at me, uncertain. "You see it," she said. "You understand. Few ever do." I did. The ship wasn't trying to kill me. It was testing me, feeding on panic, shaping reality, preying on those who surrendered to fear. By confronting it without despair, I had found a way to survive. I walked through the forest, fully aware that I was still inside its world, but no longer a prisoner. The faceless passengers followed me, not as threats, but as witnesses. The ship's presence pulsed, immense, patient. It was vast, sentient, ancient, but it was not invincible. I made a choice. I could return to the ocean, drift endlessly, or I could embrace what I had learned, walk freely within its domain. I chose the latter. Now I am part of it, not consumed, not destroyed, but aware. I walk its corridors, invisible to fear. The mariner's veil drifts beyond maps, beyond radar, waiting for the next passengers. Most will succumb. Some vanish. A rare few, like me, confront it and survive. I guide them. I teach them. I am no longer a passenger. I am its sentinel. And in that truth, I am free. I should have known something was wrong the moment I boarded the Celestial Dawn. It was a massive cruise ship, its decks sparkling under the Florida sun, and the terminal was packed with passengers eager for a week of leisure. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was watching me, not in a literal sense, but in the way a predator studies prey, patient and deliberate. I told myself I was imagining things. The first day was deceptively normal. I explored the decks, ate too much at the buffet, and sipped cocktails while staring at the endless horizon. But every time I passed the lower hallways, I noticed shadows flickering in ways that didn't make sense. Crew members smiled at me, too wide, too precise, their eyes strangely still. That night, I woke to a faint, persistent tapping. It came from the hallway outside my cabin. When I peeked through the peephole, nothing was there. I opened the door, and the corridor stretched farther than I remembered. The walls seemed to ripple faintly like water. I stepped back, and the effect vanished. My cabin door had disappeared. By the second day, passengers started disappearing. A man didn't return for breakfast. A child vanished from the pool. The crew insisted they had wandered off or gone sightseeing. But no one looked for them, and the fear among the remaining passengers was palpable. The fog came that evening, rolling across the decks in thick, white waves. It swallowed the horizon and dulled the sunlight. The ship's horn blared, irregular and short, almost like a warning. Most passengers froze, staring blindly into the mist. I tried to retreat to my cabin, but the door was gone again, replaced by a blank wall. I wandered the ship in panic, trying to find someone who could explain what was happening. Doors led to rooms I had never seen. Staircases ended midair. Mirrors reflected strangers instead of me, some with hollow eyes, mouths open in silent screams. I realized with growing horror, the ship was alive. It was reshaping reality, feeding not just on bodies, but on fear itself. By the third night, I knew I had to escape. I found a lifeboat hanging from the davit and jumped in. The water was black, viscous, as if resisting my every stroke. Behind me, the celestial dawn loomed impossibly tall, its decks stretching into the fog. Shadows pressed against the railings, faceless and silent. Hours, or maybe days, passed, time meaningless. Eventually, land appeared, pale sand, stretching endlessly, with a dense forest at its edge. Relief washed over me. I stumbled onto the shore, exhausted. But then I saw them. The missing passengers, hundreds of them, wandering like ghosts. Pale, faceless, hollow-eyed. And at their center, a woman I had glimpsed in the fog stood, hair plastered to her face, eyes black. "You can't leave," she said, her voice filling my mind. "You belong here now." Panic surged, but the sand shifted beneath my feet, pulling me back. The horizon warped, the forest bending unnaturally. The ship had followed me. This wasn't land, it was part of its world. I was trapped. Despair set in. I sank to my knees, but then I noticed something. The faceless passengers weren't moving with panic, they were calm. Their fear had ended, and the ship treated them differently. It fed on terror, but not on clarity or acceptance. I stopped struggling. I studied the figures, the sand, the fog. I listened to the ship in a way I had never dared before. Slowly I stood. The sand solidified. The path through the dunes opened. The woman in the center regarded me, uncertain. "You understand," she said. "Few ever do." I realized the ship was a predator, yes, but also a test. It reshaped reality around those who succumbed to fear. By confronting it with clarity, I had found a way to survive. I walked toward the horizon, fully aware that I was inside its domain, yet free in a way no one else was. The faceless passengers followed, not as captives, but as witnesses. The ship's presence pulsed around me, immense, patient. It was vast, ancient, and intelligent, but not omnipotent. Then I made a choice no one else could. I would not return to the ocean. I would not flee. I would remain inside its world, fully conscious, fully aware, and learn its patterns, its rules. I became a student of the ship. I am now part of it, not consumed, not destroyed, but aware. I walk its corridors, invisible to fear, observing the lost, shaping the ship's reality not with terror, but with understanding. The celestial dawn drifts beyond maps, beyond radar, waiting for the next passengers. Most will succumb to fear. Some will vanish. A rare few, like me, confront it and survive. I guide them. I teach them. I am no longer a passenger. I am its sentinel. And in that truth, I am free.
Your support keeps the horror alive, like comment and subscribe before you go.